Okay, so let's talk about the elimination diet portion of this program. This is really where we're going to be experimenting with things. That way we can remove high calorie, low relative nutrient density foods out of your diet. But we can also test what you're sensitive or possibly allergic to as far as foods go. The other thing that this does is it forces people out of their comfort zone, which I know is something you probably don't want to hear, but it forces people out of their comfort zone. So the foods and snacks and things that they typically rely on, now we've got to learn a new way of gathering a plate of food. That way later on in the future, even when we bring some of this stuff back in, we're going to have a lot more options and a lot more different ways that we can put things together. We're just going to gain experience and it's going to open up our toolbox a little bit. So a lot of the foods on here are not inherently bad for us, but if you're sensitive or allergic to these foods, they're incredibly bad for you. If you're eating foods that you're allergic to or have food sensitivities to, it can cause skin disorders. A lot of people get them on their face. It can cause inflammation throughout the body. And inflammation is a really big leader of chronic disease. And that's just a path we do not want to go down. It can cause mood and personality disorders. So there's so many things that can happen from food sensitivities, so many symptoms, but also so many underlying root cause things pointing towards chronic disease that if you have a food that you're sensitive or allergic to in your diet, we have to get rid of it. It is so vitally important. The gold standard of how to identify food sensitivities is not blood work and these other things. It's actually an elimination diet. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove unhealthy foods, but we're also going to remove some otherwise healthy foods, but these are going to be foods that tend to have a higher population of people that are allergic to them. 30% of people are lactose intolerant, for example. So that doesn't mean that you are, and doesn't mean that dairy is bad for you, but if you're lactose intolerant, then dairy is bad for you. So let's talk about this. What are we going to eliminate for our diet for this 4-week period? We've got sugar and fake sugar. Okay, so we're doing no added sugar, no fake sugar. So let's real quick make the distinction here. Added sugar, so when you look at fruit, potatoes, any vegetable, really even meat has a little bit of carbohydrates, which is sugar. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about added sugar, organic cane syrup, high fructose corn syrup, agave nectar, honey, maple syrup, any artificial sweetener that companies are adding into foods to make them more habit forming. They put them in there because they know it drives our primitive brain crazy and our body just goes nuts for this stuff. So we've got to remove that sugar. That way we can control our lipostat. Move that lipostat to the right spot so we don't have these sugar cravings all the time driving us crazy. Remember, never before in our lives has it been the wrong decision to not eat as much sugar as possible when it was available. 0.008% of our existence has existed with all of this stuff around, and our brain doesn't know how to handle this. So we have to be the ones that remove it from our diet, and if our brain knows it's there, then it's just going to try and stress you out to get you to eat it because that's never been the wrong move until now. So the research, I hate telling people this, but I like being honest, the research on fake sugar is actually pretty good. It, as far as health effects of fake sugar, isn't anywhere near, doesn't seem to have negative health effects like sugar does. But here's the thing, your brain can't tell the difference. And so when we're looking at that lipostat, we want it to be here. With sugar or fake sugar in our diets, that lipostat is going to get jacked up. Meaning, for you to eat the amount of food that you need to eat to get the results you're looking for, we've got to remove that stuff so that lipostat gets turned up here. Okay, so sugar, fake sugar, this is added sugar. That's what we're removing. You got to read those ingredient lists on the food you're eating if it has an ingredient list. But remember, real food, that's what we're going to lean into. Real food doesn't have ingredient lists. An apple is an apple. So meat is meat. Keep that in mind. Okay, so next thing we're going to eliminate is no grains. Okay, a lot of people have a gluten intolerance, and it might not be the most obvious. Some people get sick. Some kids develop ADHD, and really it's just a gluten intolerance. It can affect mood, it can depress people, it can really mess people up. It gives me a skin rash. It makes my hands and feet swell a little bit, enough where I can't get my ring on and off. But it also, when I'm brushing my teeth, it makes my gums bleed. My gums don't bleed ever, but if I've had gluten that night, if I brush my teeth, gums bleed. Disgusting stuff. So we're going to remove grains. Okay, there are healthy grains out there. There's also highly processed, super unhealthy things like breads and some other things that even when we're reintroducing this stuff, we're going to really want to make sure that you're limiting. But overall, grains aren't this terrible thing, but if you're sensitive or allergic to them, they are this terrible thing. So that's going to be part of the elimination diet. We're going to remove grains. This is going to be bread, chips, tortillas, stuff like that. Remove grains. We're also going to throw oats in there for this elimination. Again, doesn't mean they're unhealthy. We're going to remove them because they're very easy to overeat, high calorie, low nutrient density. We're going to remove them for this, reintroduce them later. We'll talk about how to do that in a little bit. Dairy. Like I said, 30% of people are lactose intolerant. This is going to be butter, milk, cheese, these things. Some and most cheeses are lactose free, but even with just a little bit, some people can't handle that. So remove it for 4 weeks. We'll reintroduce things later. And if these things are okay for you, then you'll just want to have kind of a strategy to make sure we're not overeating them, but these can be very healthy for people. Legumes. Beans. So we're going to remove legumes. Same thing. Some people handle them fine. I cannot handle dairy or grains. Dairy, 2 days later, I have diarrhea. Too much information, but tend to give too much information. Anyways, and really the grains, it's 2 days later I get a face rash. So that's kind of something interesting is it's hard to, unless you're really paying attention, to blame the right thing when some symptoms happen days after the meal you eat. So legumes, I actually do fine on them, which thank goodness I don't do fine on these. So I have to limit other things all the time. Legumes I do fine on. But again, this is something that not everyone does. So we're going to want to remove it for 4 weeks so we can reintroduce it later. So those are going to kind of be the main things. The other things, and this is just kind of because it's just like eating candy bars, alcohol, just empty sugar. So I understand people are going to live their lives and they're going to do things, but I just want you to be very aware of how alcohol makes you feel, but also just kind of the sugar effects. A lot of the same negative effects that come with sugar, there's a sugar video later on, also come with alcohol. So part of the 4-week elimination diet is just so you can possibly get out of your comfort zone, experience things out in the world without a crutch, and just gain that experience and see it's not that bad. So as you go, 4 weeks, no alcohol. You can play around with reintroducing this stuff later on. The other thing we're going to do is no snacks. So most people have kind of a go-to snack, if it's a whatever bar, if it's this or that. And what we want you to get in the habit of doing is eating enough food and taking the time to eat meals and eating enough food at each meal of the right type of stuff that we don't need snacks. The other thing we're trying to do is get you just to be able to be in control of your hormones. So many people love being hangry, and what we have to recognize is that we don't think it's funny when you're hangry. Nobody cares. It's just you being a jerk. So keep in mind that when you are getting low on blood sugar, you have plenty of fat reserves. We've got it. We've got plenty of energy. Your body just needs to learn how to go from running on super high carbohydrate and sugar into running on a mixture of carbohydrate and fat. And once your body gets good at doing that, then when you don't have immediate food, guess what? You do have immediate energy here. Your body taps into your fat stores And isn't that exactly what we're trying to do? We're trying to get your body to tap in that your fat stores, so we're losing body fat and we're getting down to a maintained, really good, healthy body fat. But even people that are lean can go days and days without eating, without being physically harmed, because we have so much body fat storage. So snacks doesn't mean snacks are the worst thing in the world, especially if you're attacking snacks like we're going to attack our meals. Protein, carbs, and fat, all of them in there. But what we're going to do is teach you how to eat enough at each meal, how to get meals around you, how to get meals to look like meat, vegetables, maybe a little bit of fruit size of your hand, maybe a little bit of starch, potatoes, sweet potatoes, those types of things. Teach you how to get those meals around you, rely on that, and then teach you to also, when you have those hunger feelings, just know it's just a hormone. You have plenty of body fat. You're not actually starving. Your body's just like, hey, I'm used to eating right now. It tells you that. You can do whatever you want with that information. What we're going to do is eat a full meal. If you're hungry enough to eat a snack, you're hungry enough to eat a full meal, do it. Okay, so that's what the elimination diet looks like. At the end of the 4 weeks, what I would recommend is if you've gotten to the results that you want, then it's time to start adding things back in. If you're not to the point where you want to be, I recommend sticking with this exactly until you get down to that point. If there's something in here that during this 4 weeks, you just cannot figure out how to live without, first of all, I would challenge you to give yourself more credit. You're stronger than that. Just kind of hang in. But if there is something, let's say it's cheese, that you just cannot figure out how to live without in the 4 weeks. When the 4 weeks is up, we're going to take that thing and we're going to reintroduce it to your life on day 1. Okay? We're going to only keep the exact same diet and only introduce it for 3 days. If you have no symptoms for those 3 days that you've reintroduced it, that means, okay, maybe we're not sensitive to that amount of lactose, and maybe cheese can be part of our diet. We need to consider that cheese and these things are also really easy to overeat. So we want to be smart about the portions that we're including, but we can add that back in. So now your diet is this plus cheese. Then you might want to test other dairy things. How's butter? How is milk? How are these things? Be careful with milk. Milk has a bunch of lactose. Anything that ends in tose is sugar. So it's pretty high in sugar, surprisingly. But we want to reintroduce things as we go. We want to do it in 3-day chunks where it's the only one thing. Because if we come out of this and we introduce all of these things, let's say I have a pizza. Then let's say I've got cheese and gluten. And then let's say the next day I eat beans. And then on that second day, I start having some weird symptoms. I just had grains, dairy, and beans. I can't narrow that down to any one of them. So take your time. I know you might be anxious to start just pumping everything back in there, but take your time 3 days at a time. You made it 4 weeks. You're going to be able to take it in slowly, and then you'll have this information for the rest of your life. It's going to be so beneficial for you to have. So the kind of symptoms to look out for are runny nose, inflammation, and you'll be able to feel kind of swelling maybe in your hands, maybe in your feet, like super high heart rate. Almonds are a trigger for me. And again, I'm not saying these things are unhealthy. Almonds aren't unhealthy. For me, they are. About an hour after I have almonds, I get anxiety feelings. And then once I finally stopped and realized I'm not actually anxious about anything and narrowed it down to I get anxious an hour after I eat almonds, I've been able to remove almonds from my diet, and then things have been great. So anxiety is something, skin rashes, things going on like that, bleeding gums. Those are kind of the typical signs. Gut disruption, diarrhea. Those are kind of the typical signs. Lack of motivation, just kind of feeling lethargic and tired, stuff like that. Those are the things to look out for. And if you're sensitive to something, accept the reality that eating that thing over and over again is going to be extremely bad for your health. and just accept that reality. And just know that once you learn to live without that thing, it might be hard to accept in the beginning, but once you figure it out, it's not that big of a deal in the long run, and your life is so much better for it. We're here for health, performance, aesthetics, and joint and tissue health. And if we're eating things that are sensitive to us, all of those things will suffer. Hope this helps. Talk to y'all soon.